hospital at night has a sound all its own. The hum of fluorescent lights, the steady, distant rhythm of heart monitors, the echo of shoes across a linoleum floor polished too many times to shine. Dr. Michael Grant walks those corridors like a man haunted by a memory he cannot leave behind. His voice, calm yet hollow, fills the still air. Some patients stay with you forever, he says, not because of how they lived, but because of how they knew they were going to die. It was 3 years ago when he met her, Emma Reynolds, 34 years old, mother of 2, diagnosed with an aggressive form of lymphoma that refused to listen to medicine. Dr. Grant remembers her first day in the ward, the way she smiled despite the fear in her eyes. She was polite, warm, and strangely composed for someone who had just been told her chances were less than 20%. But there was something else, something he couldn't name. One quiet afternoon, as he checked her vitals, Emma looked at him with startling clarity and said, "I'm not going to make it to next Thursday." Her tone wasn't fearful or dramatic. It was simple, direct, like someone telling you the weather forecast. Dr. Grant froze. "Emma," he replied carefully, "let's not talk about that. You're stable, and we're doing everything we can." She only smiled. "I know," she whispered. "But it's already decided." The nurses thought it was the medication talking, maybe fatigue, maybe despair. But the next morning, she said it again, this time to a nurse changing her IV line. "Next Thursday," she repeated, "and that's when I'll be gone." Within days, everyone on the floor knew. Some brushed it off. Others started avoiding her room. There was something unsettling about the way she said it. Not in panic, but in certainty. Dr. Grant, a man built on logic and science, tried to dismiss it. He had seen patients lose hope before. He had seen minds surrender before bodies did. But something about Emma's tone gnawed at him. The way she looked past him, almost as if she was seeing something just beyond his reach. As the week moved on, he found himself counting the days even though he didn't want to. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, approaching like an unwanted shadow. Emma remained calm. She spoke less, smiled faintly when her children visited, and spent hours staring out the window at the gray winter sky. The night before Thursday, Dr. Grant sat at his desk long after his shift had ended, flipping through her charts again and again. Her vitals were stable. Her scans hadn't changed. There was no medical reason to expect any sudden decline. And yet, something in his gut twisted when he thought about her words. When Thursday came, the ward was unusually quiet. Even the air seemed heavier. Dr. Grant stopped by her room early that morning. Emma greeted him with a tired smile. "It's today," she said softly. He wanted to tell her to stop, to fight, to hold on, but before he could speak, she added, "It's okay, doctor. You've done everything you could." Hours later, while checking another patient, he heard it. The shrill alarm of a heart monitor from down the hall. Nurses rushed past him. The sound was sharp, final. He knew exactly which room it came from. When he reached her bedside, Emma was gone, peaceful, eyes closed, a faint smile frozen on her lips. Dr. Grant stood there motionless. The time of death, 7:42 p.m., Thursday, exactly as she said. He stared at the monitor, still flashing a flat green line, and whispered, "How did you know?" The screen fades to black. Only the echo of that flat line remains. 6 months earlier, before the whispers, before the prophecy, Emma Reynolds was simply living her life. She was the kind of woman who filled a room with laughter. A marketing manager, mother to 2 young boys, married to her college sweetheart. Friends described her as radiant, always moving, always caring for someone else. But that spring, things began to change. It started with small things. Fatigue that didn't fade with rest, nights soaked in sweat, bruises she couldn't explain. At first, she brushed it off as stress. But when she found herself gasping for breath climbing the stairs, she knew something wasn't right. Her doctor ordered tests, bloodwork, imaging, a biopsy. Days later, the results came in, and her world stopped. Stage I4, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer of the lymphatic system, where the body's own immune cells turn against it. The disease had already spread to her bone marrow and abdomen. Dr. Michael Grant, the oncologist assigned to her case, remembered the look on her face when he delivered the news. Shock, yes, but also a strange composure. She listened carefully, nodding as if absorbing a truth she had somehow already sensed. "Can I beat it?" she asked. Dr. Grant didn't lie. "We'll fight it," he said. "But it won't be easy." Chemotherapy began almost immediately. The first round hit her hard. Nausea, hair loss, fatigue so deep it felt like her body was made of stone. But Emma was different. She smiled at the nurses, cracked jokes, and brought small gifts for the staff. She wrote in her journal every day. Little messages for her sons, notes of gratitude for the people who cared for her. Dr. Grant described her as the kind of patient that keeps you believing. Medicine still matters, but he also noticed something unusual in her chart. Her pain tolerance seemed almost uncanny. Her body reacted to treatment, but her spirit never wavered. And then came the first prediction. It was harmless at first. She told a nurse that her medication would be changed that afternoon, before the doctors had even decided it. Hours later, a new order came through due to a pharmacy error. Another time, she told a technician that the fire alarm would go off during her CT scan. It did, a short circuit in another wing of the hospital. The staff laughed it off. Coincidence, they said. Just intuition. But Emma didn't laugh. She started keeping track of her feelings in her journal, short notes that seemed almost prophetic. When Dr. Grant asked her about it, she said quietly, "It's like something is warning me before it happens. I don't want it to. It just does." At first, he dismissed it as anxiety, a mind under siege trying to regain control. Yet, as weeks passed, he couldn't ignore the pattern. Her predictions became more specific, more accurate. Beneath her calm surface, something inexplicable was stirring, a quiet awareness that no chart could measure, and soon, Dr. Grant would realize this was not just intuition. It was something far more haunting. By the third month of treatment, what began as coincidence had evolved into something the entire oncology unit could no longer ignore. Emma Reynolds wasn't guessing anymore. She was knowing. Dr. Grant still remembers the night it began to feel truly uncanny. Emma had been stable all week. Her vitals, her labs, everything pointed to a plateau. But that evening, she looked at him and said softly, "I'm going to spike a fever tonight, around 2 a.m. He smiled politely, assuring her that her temperature was normal, but she didn't smile back. "No," she said. "I can feel it coming." At 1:58 a.m., her temperature rose to 102.1 degrees. Nurses logged the time. She slept through most of it. The next morning, she greeted Dr. Grant with the faintest trace of a smirk. "Told you," she whispered. Over the next few weeks, similar incidents followed. She predicted a nurse's schedule change before it appeared on the roster. She told Dr. Grant her white blood count would crash the following Thursday, exact to the hour, and it did. The team joked nervously, calling her the hospital's psychic. Even Dr. Grant chuckled at first, though the sound never reached his eyes. Behind closed doors, the staff began to talk. "Maybe she's just perceptive," one nurse said. "Maybe she senses subtle changes before they show up in the tests." Others weren't so sure. There was something eerie about her precision. Then, one afternoon, Emma asked for a pen and a small notebook. She began writing something on the back page. Dates. Dr. Grant happened to walk in and asked, half curious, half concerned, what she was noting. She looked up and said quietly, "Just things I feel coming." He took the notebook gently, glanced at the list. The next medication change, the next fever spike, all with exact times beside them. But at the bottom, circled twice, was a final entry. June 14th, the end. Dr. Grant felt a chill run through him. "What is that?" he asked. She looked him straight in the eyes and said, "That's when I'm leaving." He tried to reason with her, explained that no one could predict such things. He mentioned stress, fatigue, even suggested speaking with the hospital counselor. She listened politely, nodded, and then said something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "Doctor, you study how the body dies. But there's a part of us you can't scan or measure. That part already knows." From that day forward, her demeanor shifted. She wasn't afraid, not in the way terminal patients often are. Instead, it was as if she was preparing for something she accepted completely. Dr. Grant confided in a colleague, Dr. Patel, who listened and said, "She's finding patterns. That's what patients do when they face the unknown. It's her mind trying to make sense of chaos." But even he looked uneasy when another of Emma's predictions, a sudden power outage in her ward, came true during a maintenance malfunction she couldn't possibly have known about. The team started documenting her statements, half out of curiosity, half disbelief. Out of 14 predictions, 11 came true. Dr. Grant's rational mind fought to stay grounded. He reminded himself of science, of psychology, of coincidence. But each time he looked at that circled date, June 14th, he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was unfolding, something beyond the reach of medicine. He would later admit, "I didn't believe her. I couldn't. But part of me was scared to check her chart each morning, just to see if her next prediction had come true." The line between science and mystery was beginning to blur, and for the first time in his career, Dr. Grant wasn't sure which side he stood on. Dr. Michael Grant had built his life on certainty. For 20 years, science had been his anchor, numbers, patterns, protocols, all aligning to make sense of chaos. But Emma Reynolds was beginning to undo everything he believed. Each passing day, her predictions chipped away at the walls he had spent a lifetime constructing. He began staying late at the hospital, reviewing her chart long after his colleagues had gone home. The glow of the computer screen cast pale shadows across his face as he scrolled through pages of stable vitals and improving counts, data that refused to align with the fear creeping through him. One night, as he compared her most recent lab results, he found himself whispering under his breath, "This isn't possible." Emma was holding steady. By every measurable standard, she was not dying. Yet he couldn't stop seeing the date, June 14th, scrawled in her small, looping handwriting. Colleagues began to notice the change in him. Dr. Patel found him in the physician's lounge one morning, staring blankly at a wall. "You're too close to this case," Patel warned gently. "You're letting her get in your head." Grant tried to laugh it off, but the sound cracked halfway through. She's predicting things, Sam. Things she couldn't possibly know." Patel sighed. "You've been up 3 nights in a row. Go home. Get some sleep." But sleep didn't come. When he finally went home, he found himself sitting in the dark of his living room, surrounded by silence. His wife, already asleep, didn't notice him whisper, "What if she's right?" The question felt like a betrayal to his profession, an admission that somewhere, deep down, he was beginning to believe in something beyond science. Back in the hospital, Emma was weakening. Her skin had grown pale, her voice softer, but her presence still carried an inexplicable calm. "I'm not scared anymore," she told him one morning. "It's like I'm remembering something I used to know." Her words lingered in his mind like a melody he couldn't forget. He began to dread visiting her room, not because of her illness, but because of the serenity that surrounded her, as if she were already halfway between 2 worlds. In the privacy of his office, Dr. Grant wrote notes he never submitted to any medical file. Personal reflections, half scientific, half desperate. "Patient demonstrates premonitory behavior not explained by illness," he scribbled one night. "Is death somehow anticipated at a cellular or subconscious level?" He stopped, staring at the words, realizing how unscientific they sounded. He closed the notebook and whispered to himself, "I'm losing it." The next morning, Emma was smiling again, her strength fading but her composure unshaken. "It's okay, doctor," she said softly. "You don't have to understand everything." For the first time in his career, Dr. Michael Grant felt powerless, not because medicine had failed, but because something deeper, older, and infinitely mysterious had taken its place. The final week began like any other, yet everyone in the oncology ward could feel something shift, a quiet, uneasy awareness that grew heavier with each passing day. June 14th was coming, the date Emma had spoken of again and again, and though no one dared say it aloud, her words had spread through the hospital like an invisible current. Even the nurses, who once dismissed her predictions, now avoided her room when the clock struck certain hours. Dr. Michael Grant told himself he would not indulge this superstition. He buried himself in lab reports, vitals, dosage charts, anything to drown out the whisper in his mind. But every evening, when he passed her room, she would smile faintly and say, "Almost there." Monday came. Emma was stable. Her scans showed no sudden progression, her vitals steady, her bloodwork unremarkable. Dr. Grant almost let himself believe the worst of it was over. She spent the day laughing softly with her sons, drawing small pictures with crayons they brought from home. "You'll hang these on the fridge for me, okay?" she told them. They nodded, too young to understand the weight behind her words. Tuesday brought a mild fever. Nothing alarming, just a low-grade spike. But Dr. Grant noticed she didn't seem surprised. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "It's starting," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. By Wednesday, her breathing had become shallow. Her oxygen levels dropped despite stable labs. The medical explanation didn't add up. She wasn't in organ failure. Her heart was strong. Yet she seemed to be fading, as if some unseen force was gently pulling her away. Nurses moved quietly around her, speaking in hushed tones. One later admitted, it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Dr. Grant stayed late that night, sitting at her bedside, long after visiting hours. Rain pattered against the window, the city lights reflecting on the wet glass. "You could fight this," he said softly. "And we can stabilize you." Emma shook her head slowly. "I'm not supposed to," she whispered. "I've made peace with it." When he asked her how she could be so sure, she closed her eyes and replied, "Because something told me, not in words, just a knowing, like remembering the end of a story you've already read." Thursday morning arrived under gray skies. The air was thick and still. Emma asked to go outside, just for a few minutes. The nurses bundled her in a blanket and wheeled her into the hospital courtyard. The sun broke through the clouds briefly, bathing her in pale golden light. She tilted her head back, eyes closed, a faint smile touching her lips. "I can feel the warmth again," she murmured. "It's been so long." Dr. Grant stood beside her, his hands gripping the wheelchair handles, feeling utterly helpless. For all his years of study, all his training, nothing had prepared him for this. The calm acceptance of someone who knew exactly when her story would end. That evening, at 7:42 p.m., the monitors in her room began to sound. A single, long tone echoed through the corridor. Nurses rushed in, but Dr. Grant already knew. He stood frozen as the line on the monitor turned flat, unbroken, final. "There was no medical reason for her to die that day," he said later, his voice trembling. "Not yet, and yet she did." The staff gathered in silence outside her room, the weight of what had happened pressing on every heart. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. Emma Reynolds had passed away, peacefully, exactly as she had said she would after Emma's passing. The oncology floor felt different, quieter somehow, as if her absence had left an invisible imprint in the air. For days, no one spoke openly about what had happened. But in the unspoken glances between nurses, the heavy pauses in conversations, it was clear that her final words still echoed in their minds. Next Thursday. Dr. Michael Grant found himself wandering the halls at night, unable to leave. He would pause outside her empty room, the door now closed, her nameplate already removed. Inside, the bed was stripped bare, the monitors unplugged. Yet he could almost hear her voice. Calm, certain, impossibly sure of her own fate, he threw himself into the paperwork. Discharge notes, final lab reports, review of autopsy findings, none of which gave him answers. Her organs showed no acute failure, no infection, no catastrophic event that should have caused sudden death. Her heart had simply stopped. Spontaneous cardiac arrest, the report read, a phrase that meant we don't know why. At her funeral, the summer air was warm, a gentle breeze moving through the trees. The hospital staff stood together in a quiet row, faces solemn. Emma's husband thanked Dr. Grant for everything he'd done, his voice breaking as he said, "She trusted you. She said you listened to her. Really listened." Dr. Grant nodded, unable to find words. All he could think was how she had spoken of that final Thursday with such calm, and how he hadn't believed her. Afterward, he sat alone in his car, watching the mourners leave. "There was nothing left for me to fix," he said softly. But I couldn't stop trying to understand it. Back at the hospital, the questions wouldn't leave him. He reviewed every detail of her case. The bloodwork, the scans, the vitals, even the medication logs. Nothing explained it. It was as though her body had obeyed a command that medicine couldn't perceive. He began reading into theories, psychological, philosophical, even fringe science. Could the human mind, at some level, decide its own ending? Could consciousness, the part of us that exists beyond neurons and tissue, somehow know when it's time? His colleagues dismissed it as grief-talking, a mind reaching for order after witnessing something inexplicable. But late at night, he knew it was more than that. There was something in Emma's eyes that final day. Not fear, not surrender, but recognition. She wasn't dying, he later reflected. She was remembering. And though Dr. Grant returned to his rounds, his conferences, his carefully structured life of logic and data, part of him had changed forever. The science he loved suddenly felt smaller. Not wrong, but incomplete. He no longer saw his patients as charts or cases. He saw mysteries, each one living, breathing, and carrying truths medicine had yet to touch. Years have passed since Emma Reynolds took her final breath. Yet Dr. Michael Grant still carries her story like a shadow he can't put down. Time has weathered him. Streaks of gray in his hair, lines beneath his eyes, but the memory remains sharp, like a photograph burned into the mind. He sits in his office now, the skyline of the city stretching beyond his window. The world outside moves quickly, traffic, sirens, life, but inside it's still. His voice is quieter, steadier, as if each word has been measured against a lifetime of questions. Medicine can explain how we die, he says, but sometimes not why. He keeps Emma's file in a drawer he rarely opens, not for lack of closure, but because he knows it will never bring him any. When he does open it, the pages have yellowed slightly. And there, clipped to the front, is a small note written in her handwriting, the list of predictions, ending with that final circled date, June 14th. It no longer feels eerie. It feels sacred. He reflects on how she changed him, not through science, but through something deeper. After her death, he began to listen differently. When a patient said, "I feel something's wrong," he didn't dismiss it as anxiety. He paused, leaned in, and listened, not just to the symptoms, but to the human being behind them. He admits he still doesn't know what happened, whether Emma somehow sensed the rhythms of her body, or if there was something beyond biology at play. "I don't believe in fate," he says quietly, "but I do believe in the unmeasurable." There are moments, late at night, when he walks the hospital corridors alone and hears the soft echo of distant monitors, that same haunting melody that filled the ward on the night she died. And for a heartbeat, he feels her presence again, not as a ghost, but as a reminder that science and soul are not enemies. They are simply two languages trying to describe the same truth. "Emma taught me something I didn't learn in medical school," he says. "That death isn't just a failure of the body. It's a passage, one that sometimes, somehow, we already know we're approaching." The camera drifts through the familiar corridors, the same halls we saw in the beginning, but now they feel different. Not sterile, not cold, just human. Dr. Grant's voice softens as the scene fades. "Maybe death isn't an ending we discover," he says. "Maybe it's a truth we remember when the time comes." The frame lingers on the faint reflection of Dr. Grant in the window, a man who has devoted his life to studying life, yet humbled by the mystery that still lies beyond it. The hum of a heart monitor fades into silence, and we are left with a single, lingering thought, that perhaps the greatest mysteries of medicine are not about how we die, but how deeply we understand what it means to be alive.